Goal 3.
The Americanitos bus was a lot fuller than usual as it trundled down Sunset Boulevard through glorious Beverly Hills. Today's match was in Glamourland, and friends and girlfriends had come along for the ride, to breathe in the heady atmosphere, to feel part of it all, for one afternoon at least. Santiago sat at the back with his grandmother and brother. He was staring out through the window and looked nervous and edgy. Mercedes looked plain angry. She'd been building up to saying something from the moment they boarded the bus, and both grandsons knew what was coming.
"Your father should be here to watch you."
"It's just another game," said Santiago with a shrug, sounding a lot more indifferent than he felt.
"It's not."
Santiago turned to look at his grandmother. "You know what he said when I told him about the agent?"
"I can probably guess."
"He said, 'Movie stars have agents. What does an agent want with you?' So I tell him the agent sees me, he signs me, I go to Europe and make plenty of money, and I come back and buy us a house on the West Side. And you know what he says then?" Julio had been reading a book, apparently not listening to the conversation. But he looked up and repeated the words they had all heard from Herman many times.
"There are two types of people in this world. People in big houses and people like us who cut their lawns and wash their cars."
"That's exactly what he said," said Santiago as his brother went back to his book. "The only way he believes we can make things better is by buying a truck so we can have our own gardening business. Big deal." Mercedes sighed.
"Your father has had a hard life."
Santiago glanced at his ripped jeans and faded t-shirt. "And we don't?" The field was good, better than anything the Americanitos had ever played on. The grass was in pristine condition and reminded Santiago of some of the lawns he spent hours cutting. And it wasn't just the field that was different. On either side there was banked seating for spectators, and even a proper scoreboard. On the far touchline, the Galaxy reserves were getting their pre-match pep talk from no less than 4 identically track-suited coaches. Nearby stood trestle tables loaded with electric fans, coolers packed with soft drinks, and rows of plastic water bottles. To complete the picture, trim cheerleaders were going through the first of their perfectly drilled routines. The Americanitos and their girlfriends, proudly dressed up for their day out in their tightest skirts and largest hooped earrings, simply gawked. They'd seen nothing like this before. This was another world. Cesar, cigarette dangling from his mouth as usual, looked at the anxious faces of his own players as they stared across at the tanned, athletic, all-American boys waiting to take the field. He spat his cigarette out onto the ground. "Hey, come on, you guys. We gonna beat ourselves here? Okay, they look good, but that don't mean they play good. Get out there and show them what the Americanitos can do." Cesar's rallying call was answered with a few half-hearted shouts of "yeah" and "all right." But the portly coach feared that the Galaxy reserves might have this game won before they even kicked the ball. Even Santiago looked nervous. But Santiago was nervous for another reason. This was the chance he had only ever dreamed of. Farther along the touchline, he saw a man standing up in the ranked seating. He was waving. It was Glenn. Santiago waved back. Glenn was here. That must mean the agent was here too. As his teammates ran onto the field, Santiago kneeled down by his sports bag, turned his back, and grabbed his inhaler for a quick, unnoticed hit. Only his family knew about the asthma. He preferred it that way. Glenn was sitting with his daughter, and as the teams lined up, his eyes were scanning the spectators for Barry Rankin. He was late. The match had not started well for the Americanitos. They were already one down and were struggling to keep up with a clinical, well-organized side playing disciplined soccer. It was plain to see the result of the Galaxy reserves having 4 coaches. They were neat and efficient in defense, midfield, and attack. And while no one stood out, as a unit, they were impressive. Santiago was playing a lot deeper than he preferred, trying to marshal the midfield, attempting to get something going. If it was frustrating for Santiago, it was even more so for Mercedes as she watched and fretted with Julio at her side.
They can't keep possession. Santiago is too deep. Too deep. He should be up front. If he goes up front, he'll never get the ball, said Julio. On the far side, Glenn was worried too. Not only because Santiago was struggling to show his true ability, but also that there was still no sign of Barry Rankin. There was a rare cheer from the Americanitos supporters, and Glenn looked back from scanning the seating to see Santiago emerging from a tackle in his own half, the ball at his feet. He rounded an opposing midfielder and set off on a long run out wide. As he cut inside, a defender came thundering into the tackle. Santiago dummied him as though he wasn't there, went wide again, and looked up for support. It was still on the way. There was no one to pass to. As the fullback bore down, Santiago shimmied inside and sent a left-foot shot from the tightest of angles, screaming past the goalkeeper and in at the near post. Yes!
Shouted Mercedes.
Oh, yes!
Bawled Glenn. He turned to his daughter.
You see? That's what I've been talking about. And that Pillock Rankin isn't even here to see it. Can I use your phone?
Barry Rankin had his eyes full elsewhere. He was stretched out on a lounger at someone's, he couldn't exactly remember whose, beach house, admiring the bikini-clad eye candy draped around the pool. Music was pumping out from a CD player, and Barry was enjoying a long, cool drink when his cell phone rang. Without thinking, he flipped it open and answered the call.
Yo!
He didn't get a chance to speak again for the next 30 seconds, as Glenn bawled him out for not being at the game. When Glenn finally paused for breath, Barry took his chance. Listen, Glenn, listen. I did not forget. I've been in a meeting since breakfast.